a contare sul loro talento. Grazie Beppe, e noi chiamiamo insieme il premio Pulitzer, Peter Kann, che ci insegnerà come riconoscere il giornalismo di qualità attraverso 10 regole. Nice to have you here. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Ecco la sigla. Il giornalismo di qualità, 10 regole per riconoscerlo. Peter Kann farà uno speech di un quarto d'ora e poi ragazzi avrete la possibilità di fargli delle domande. 15 minuti qui and answer for you after.
Thank
you. See you later.
Good morning. The program for this very fine event identifies me with one word, journalist. And I'm very pleased at that. Over a 50-year career in journalism, I also had a number of grander titles, but the one I prefer most is journalist. And that's because despite all the discussion here about different forms of publishing, print and online distribution, old and new business models. At the heart of publishing is content or journalism. Now, it is true that good journalism does not always result in publishing success. But bad journalism almost always leads to publishing failure. Publishing a newspaper is a little like running a restaurant. Good marketing and fine linens and china and elegant service all are very nice. But what ultimately matters, of course, is the quality of the food. For a newspaper, that food is journalism. There have been and will be two speakers here, Gerard Baker and Jill Abramson, who represent the best of American publishing, the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. And both are great institutions precisely because they do great journalism. Maybe not always, but at least most of the time. And I think the same is true of a number of fine Italian publications that are represented here. So what distinguishes high-quality journalism? How do we or you recognize it? What sets it apart? So here are my 10 rules for identifying quality journalism, and they apply whether you read on newsprint, on paper, or on a tablet, or on a computer. First, does the journalism try to give you the truth? And does it do that by collecting and then connecting facts that lead to the truth? Does it tell you the source of the facts? And does it cite by name the sources of the quotes and of the other information in the story? Truth is not just in the eye of the beholder, and news is not just a matter of views. Truth often is very hard to find, but it does exist. And the job of the journalist is to find it, fact by fact by fact. Second, is a news story fair? Has the journalist writing it kept an open mind? And if an issue being written about is controversial, and many are, does the story fairly present both sides and give you a chance to make up your own mind? Third, does the journalism separate news and opinion? Now, both are fine and both can be well done, but they are not a stew to be mixed together. They really are separate courses like meat and dessert. So is the news fact-based and fairly presented, given to you in one part of the newspaper, and is the opinion kept separate and labeled as opinion? Newspapers are not always good at drawing this line, but they surely are much better at it than television and the internet, which often have no lines whatsoever. Fourth, is the journalist presented to you, the readers, as the most important constituency of the newspaper? Or is it presented because of some vested interest or hidden agenda of the publisher, or of a politician, or of an advertiser, or of some crusader? In that case, it is not honest journalism, it is simply propaganda. Fifth, is the journalism original? By that I mean, does it tell readers things they do not know and are not likely to learn anywhere else? Did the reporter show enterprise to uncover information, or did he or she just follow a press pack, or just rewrite a press release that everyone has? Original, enterprising journalism is very hard to do, and it sets the best apart from the rest. Sixth, is the journalism you read useful to you? Does it relate to you and your life and your interests? Or, just as good, does it surprise you and thus create new interests and thus expand your life? In one way or another, journalism should relate to you. It should tell you things you did not know and did not know that you wanted to know. It should engage you. Seventh, does the journalism have some serious purpose and value? Are you smarter and wiser for having read it? And here I draw a distinction with entertainment, which is a very different art form. And yes, parts of a newspaper sometimes can be entertaining, but that is not the purpose and the primary value of a newspaper. Journalism doesn't have to be grim or boring, but its purpose has to be to enlighten you, not simply to entertain you. Eighth, does the journalism you read present a reasonably accurate picture of the world that you yourself see? Now, by its nature, journalism is more likely to focus on problems than on solutions, and on bad news rather than good news. But still, if most of what is presented to you is about death and destruction and murder and mayhem and gloom and doom, then you are really getting a warped picture of the world. And when everything is presented to you as a crisis, then you don't really have to take any of it very seriously, and that's a problem. Ninth, does the journalism put events in context? Does it provide you with some history, some background, some analysis to an event or an issue? If not, if all you read is about individual, isolated events, then it is pretty shallow journalism. Not all news events are actually entirely new, and they should not be presented as if they are. Truly good journalism should include the context of the events, how and why, as well as what, where, when. 10th, does the newspaper you read have an attention span? Because much of modern journalism does not. It hops from one crisis to another, and rarely returns to yesterday's story or last week's. In an age of instant everything, from fast food to instant messaging to instant Google responses, does the journalism you read reflect some depth and some breadth and some time that the reporter invested in writing it, and that you then will invest in reading it? Because time actually is good, not bad. Time is really our friend, not our enemy. And now I'm going to add one bonus standard. Does the newspaper admit mistakes? Not just little mistakes like misspelling a name or getting a date wrong. That's quite common. But more serious mistakes of judgment and of fairness in its coverage. Those admissions are very rare. Now, we all make mistakes, but it is a sign of quality to openly admit them. And that's true in our lives, and it should also be true in our journalism. Thank you. So those are my 10 or 11 ways to identify quality journalism. You, of course, may compile your own list with more or other standards, but the important thing is to see differences and to draw distinctions. I think thanks to Osservatorio, you students here are better able to do that. Osservatorio really is a unique institution. I only wish we had a similar one in the US. It supports good journalism, and it believes that good journalism supports good citizenship. And thanks to Osservatorio, you young news readers of today, I think are going to be wiser and better citizens of tomorrow. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. I invite you to sit down with us.
I need my headphones, yes.
Le cuffie per la traduzione. Adesso i ragazzi potranno porre le domande a Peter Kann, che ci ha elencato i 10 criteri per riconoscere un giornalismo di qualità, quindi verità, giustizia, la notizia separata dall'opinione, rivolgersi ai lettori, devono essere naturalmente non la propaganda politica a ispirare i pezzi, ma l'interesse del lettore a prevalere. Il giornalismo deve essere originale, non bisogna copiare, mai avere questa tentazione. E poi la saggezza, mettere tanta saggezza nel valore dei pezzi, perché l'intrattenimento è una cosa, l'informazione è un'altra. Rappresentare le soluzioni, non soltanto i problemi. Quindi, Peter, good news is news, not only bad news is news. Sei d'accordo? Bisogna anche dare le buone notizie.
I do agree, actually, and that's my point about recognizing the world around you. There are problems in the world that you see, but there are also many good things in the world that you see. And journalism should reflect both. There are many problems in the world, but there are also solutions to many of those problems, and journalism much more often focuses on the problems and very rarely points us towards solutions.
Grazie, quindi attenzione non soltanto ai momenti critici, ma anche alla possibilità di far emergere le soluzioni, la possibilità di vedere anche ciò che di buono nella nostra realtà emerge. Non vedo però le vostre mani alzate. Eccone, una è subito lì, nella giacca chiara, e poi Vediamo gli altri ragazzi. che
Good morning,
vogliono-
I'm Camilla. Looking for the scoop by any means often takes the journalists not to stop. In this way, in some articles, we find the monster before the justice gives its sentence. Don't you think journalists should be able to have respect for the people they write about and not only follow their passion? Thank you.
Yes, that's a very good question. You know, I'll give you a theory. I think individual journalists, when they operate on their own, most often tend to be quite fair. On the other hand, when you put 20 or 30 or 40 journalists together chasing the same story, then you get the appearance of a pack of wolves in pursuit of some quarry. So in a group, the journalist's standards drop to the lowest common denominator. It's why I'm always in favor of individual reporters pursuing a story on their own, not joining the pack.
Assolutamente mantenere alta la qualità. C'è un ragazzo in seconda fila con la giacca chiara. Grazie.
Salve a tutti.
E basta tenerlo vicino.
Ok. Buongiorno a tutti, sono Francesco Mellori, liceo scientifico Filippo Masci di Chieti. Formulerò la domanda in italiano per cercarla di rendere più espressiva, insomma. Bene, lei è stato fortunato ed è molto abile e l'ha dimostrato vincendo il premio Pulitzer. Come ha già detto, non è facile nel mondo di oggi, in un giornalismo che tratta molte volte e si incentra più, diciamo, sull'aspetto economico. Abbiamo avuto anche esponenti del giornalismo economico, che però va in economia di tempo, diciamo, se mi passate il gioco di parole. E quindi in questo mondo giornalistico che va in economia di tempo, avere una concezione del giornalismo come la sua, ossia di un giornalismo che riesce ad assumere le sembianze di una forma poetica, comunque una poesia, di un giornalismo che diventa poesia e che comunque riesce a esprimere anche il suo lato letterario, il suo lato migliore. Ecco, quello che le chiedo io oggi è la marcia in più, questa marcia in più che, con cui lei è riuscita a vincere il premio Pulitzer e che comunque, con cui comunque è riuscita anche ad abbattere un po' la concezione magari troppo utilitaristica della cultura giornalistica. Thanks.
Che bella domanda, eh? Una visione romantica anche del giornalismo.
That is true. I do have a somewhat romantic vision of journalism, and maybe a little closer to poetry, as you say, than to a craft. And I recognize anyone who is able to pursue that kind of journalism was very fortunate, and I was one to be a foreign correspondent in an era before any of the modern technologies, which meant that if I traveled from my base, let's say in Saigon, and I went to Afghanistan, I could get lost for 3 weeks, and my office had no idea where I was. There was no way to communicate with them. There were no cell phones. So I had the good fortune to be able to live a life of some adventure and independence. Now, there is less of that these days, but I think it is still what a lot of journalists should aspire to.
Purtroppo gli inviati oggi hanno sempre meno tempo, o si perdono oppure li raggiungono e sono pressati dalle richieste di editori oppure dalle televisioni di fare tutto molto veloce. La concorrenza stringe,
Yeah.
no? C'è sempre meno tempo per guardare, realizzare e scrivere. Tutto rapido oggi. Un'altra domanda?
So modern technology, as we've talked about the last 2 days, has benefits and it also has detriments. I think actually it is a detriment to the reporter. It may be a benefit to some of the readers. But.
Grazie.
Buongiorno, io sono Cecilia del liceo Massimo d'Azeglio di Torino. Allora, lei prima ha detto che una fonte deve essere sempre espressamente citata, però nel caso in cui la fonte sia confidenziale, quindi ovviamente non può essere citata nell'articolo, come può il lettore o il giornalista stesso stabilire se l'articolo è di qualità o meno? Grazie.
Yes, another good question. Ideally, sources should be named by name. I recognize that there are cases where sources are confidential and do not want their name used. But even in those cases, the agenda of the anonymous source should be clear to the reader. So if a politician from the left is criticizing a politician from the right and doesn't want his name used, it should be clear to the reader that that is one of the left politicians speaking. If someone is attacking the business or the business ethics of a corporation, and that person is a union leader within that company, maybe the union leader can't be named, but it should be clear to the reader that the quote is coming from an official of a union. So you have to, we, the journalists, have to help the readers understand, even if you cannot use the name, but they should be able to understand the agenda of the speaker.
Supplisce la credibilità di chi firma, giusto? In qualche modo è una garanzia. C'è una mano alzata lì che si avvicina vicina e dopo torniamo qui.
Buongiorno, sono Roberta Savella del Liceo Scientifico Pacinotti di La Spezia. Volevo chiedere quanto è importante lo stile in cui è scritto un articolo, per esempio frasi molto brevi, incisive o lunghe di ampio respiro, in relazione con il messaggio che si vuole trasmettere.
The question is about style. Look, individual journalists have individual styles, at least after they have gone through a training process. And that's a very good thing. Not all journalists should write the same and read the same. Actually, short and long, I mean, much of the best journalism, and that's also true of literature, alternates long sentences and short ones. The long sentences explain something. The short sentences have impact and emphasize.
E si possono alternare. You can use long and short.
Right, both.
A seconda del tempo e delle necessità. Prego, qui davanti ci sono più mani alzate.
Sono Greta Rossi del Liceo Classico di Reggio Emilia. Volevo chiederle come si racconta una guerra secondo lei, e soprattutto dal punto di vista di quegli inviati che devono rendere conto ad un paese, il proprio, che magari in quella guerra è implicato. Non so, mi viene in mente la guerra in Iraq e il ruolo della stampa, dei giornalisti statunitensi.
Yes, another good question and a quite practical one. So I've covered quite a few wars: Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, India, Pakistan, and so on. And each war is different. Some wars actually have two sides and something like front lines, like old-fashioned wars. More modern wars have no front lines. The war is everywhere and nowhere. That makes it much more difficult for the reporter. If the reporter, let's say, is American, covering a war in which American soldiers are fighting, inevitably there is going to be some journalistic bias in favor of the Americans. A little bit of that may be patriotism, But the other part of it is, let's say in the Vietnam War, journalists were not able to operate with the North Vietnamese or the Viet Cong. We could only operate on one side. So we didn't see either the good or the bad things that the other side were doing. We did see the good and bad things our own side did. And actually, most American journalists were quite critical of the way that America fought that war. And I think most American journalists in Iraq were quite critical of the way the Americans fought in Iraq. But they still were, to some extent, captives of their own side. That's inevitable.
Inevitabile. Ecco, ancora una domanda, direi, perché ci mancano 50 secondi.
Buongiorno, io sono Miriam del liceo Regina Margherita di Torino e volevo chiederle, Massimo Gramellini dice che per fare del buon giornalismo bisogna non essere autoreferenziali, quindi leggere anche articoli di chi non la pensa come noi. Lei condivide, secondo lei è una buona regola?
Conosce Massimo Gramellini, editorialista della Stampa, vice direttore della Stampa, per noi un grande giornalista che tutte le mattine scrive un buongiorno, che fa opinione. È un uomo che è seguito anche dai ragazzi perché ha un modo di scrivere molto impressive, molto short sentences and great personality. Quindi questo ha detto.
If I understand the question right, it really is about journalistic modesty. You know, journalists should not be part of the story. Journalists should sit on the side and cover the story. Unfortunately, there's a lot of celebrity journalism these days where the celebrity journalists want to be seen right in the middle of the story as actors, but they shouldn't be. I mean, my journalistic hero, or one of them, was someone many of you may have read, Tiziano Terzani, who I spent many years in Asia with. Tiziano had a wonderful ability to describe what he saw and the people he spoke to, but he never put himself in the middle of the story. And that's why he was a great journalist.
Grazie, grazie a Peter Kann. Posso farle scegliere una punta della stella? I would like to know from you if you think that Osservatorio and the newspapers in school, the benefits are more editorial, civil,